So hello, everybody. Let's wait a minute as the participants come in. It always takes a couple of seconds for the hall to fill up, so to speak, on Zoom. So we'll wait about 30 seconds so that the level can go up. Okay, I believe we can start now. So, welcome to this webinar on software technologies and standards, sponsored by SWForum.eu. My name is John Favreau, and I'm with Trust IT and the communications lead for SWForum.eu. We have a rich program of speakers today. There you can see them. Who are not only going to present practical examples of standards at work in our research projects, but also give you information about programs and assistance made available to the software community by the European Commission for effective use of standards and participation in the standardization process. But first, I'd like to go through a couple of quick housekeeping items, which you can see written here. Most importantly, you are most welcome to write questions to the speakers during their talks and after their talks. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen that you can use. If you really can't find it, then you can also use the chat. We'll be monitoring both of them. We will take a few questions during the talks if time permits. And in any case, there will be an opportunity for questions and comments during the panel discussion later on. So I would like to immediately pass the floor to Juncal Alonso of Technalia, who is the coordinator of SWForum.eu, and will give us more information about our project.
Thank you, John. Thank you all for attending this webinar on software technologies and standards. Give me a second to share my screen, please. Okay. So I hope you can see my screen well now.
Not yet.
Not yet?
No, not yet.
Okay. Let me try again.
Now something is starting. There we go.
Okay, that's perfect. So thank you again, John, and all the speakers and attendees today attending this software technologies and standards webinar that we are organizing in the context of the CSA Software Forum. I am Juncal Alonso from Technalia, and I am the coordinator of the CSA. So before we start, I wanted to give you a little bit of context about this webinar series, because this is the second webinar that we organized in collaboration with our community projects. And the main objective is to share experience, to see how these projects are dealing with specific software relevant topics. We started with the topic of open source in October last year. And this is the second one focused on standards. I would also like to recall that as a result of these webinars, we are also producing a report with the main recommendations and the main conclusions obtained from this webinar. So I also invite you to check this report that it's already available for the previous webinar, and we will be also producing a similar one for this. So I also want to give some highlights on the CSA, which is organizing this webinar series. So we are SWForum. We started at October 2020, so we are almost finalizing. We are going to finish the action in June this year. And as a CSA, we are collaborating 5 relevant partners. 2 of us are here today. You have already known John from Trust IT and me from Technalia, which I'm coordinating the project. But we also have the University of Oxford, Conceptivity, Politecnico di Milano here in the consortium. So I'm gonna present very briefly the main objectives and the main key results that we are developing to achieve these objectives. And of course, I will invite you all to check our assets, our reports and deliverables that are available in our webpage. So the main objective of SWForum is to raise awareness and strengthen the competitiveness of the European software industry. And as you can guess from our name, we are doing so by creating this sustainable forum. For us, the forum has 2 meanings, let's say. One is the community, of course, that we want to build around software technologies. And on the other hand, the platform itself, where we collect all the assets and we use to provide all the assets and all these services that we are creating in the context of this CSA. So these main objectives can be broken down into more specific ones. I will review now them very quickly. So starting for the first one, which is to promote the cross-fertilization in different areas of software. Here you can see software, digital infrastructures, and cybersecurity. And this is because in the beginning of the project, we established that this would be the main domains. But of course, this has evolved, and we have incorporated others like standards or open source, where we are also putting the focus, let's say. So we want to create this cross-fertilization between the different stakeholders, and we are doing so by the organization of workshops and webinars like this one, for example. At the beginning of the project, these were only online, but now we have moved to the physical workshops, and the latest one was organized in Brussels last year on the topic of open source. The second one is or has the focus on creating this self-sustainable forum, and we say self-sustainable because we want to create this long-lasting community that keeps or stays alive after the CSA ends. And for that, we need to create a governance model for the community we are creating. We also need to establish these fellowships, these fellows through the fellowship program we have launched, and of course provide content and assets and reports. And this is done through the landscape reports, which at the end is like desktop research on the main topics, and also through the research and innovation roadmaps that are also enriched by policy-related recommendations that we are delivering at the end of the project. Now we are currently in the consultation phase for these research and innovation roadmaps, and we are organizing different events, or we are collecting this feedback from the community through different means. The third objective is targeting more the projects themselves, because we are the umbrella for the projects related to software technologies, and for this we have the taxonomy, what we call the taxonomy, which is a classification at the end of the projects that are dealing with software technologies, European funded projects. We base this taxonomy or this classification in the ACM computing classification, but we have modified it ad hoc for this purpose. And we have all developed or implemented this taxonomy in a tool, in a platform itself, what we call the project radar, where we have 55 projects, I think, currently, and where it can be seen as an bird view, which are the currently funded projects, on which technologies and domains are they working, which status, which is the timeline of the project, which technologies are they using, and other relevant information. For the projects themselves, we also have what we call the hub of project mini sites, and this is like small windows for the projects to be able to reach a wider audience through our community, where they can disseminate their news, propose events, communicate the news, and these kind of things. And last but not least, we also provided guidance for these projects with respect to the market readiness level assessment, because usually these projects are implementing themselves, these technology readiness level assessments, but we are helping them with a methodology that we created to combine also the classical technology readiness level assessment with the market readiness level assessment in order for them to create outcomes with more impact. So that's it. That's what I wanted to say today. That just to show you in a nutshell what we are doing. Our activities, let's say, are organized into these three macro activities that you can see here in this slide, starting with mapping, cross-fertilization, and synergizing, rule mapping and governance, and of course, engaging. And that's all from my side. Enjoy today this interesting webinar, and I don't want to lose more time. Let's the party get started, John.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Honka, for this. And now I'll pass the floor directly to Luis Carlos Busquets of the European Commission. He is the project officer of SWForum.eu, but he is also a strong promoter of open standards, open source, and open architectures. So Luis, the floor is yours. I think you're muted.
Mute now. Okay. No, I was trying to find the unmute button, but since I already started sharing the screen, it was difficult. Well, first of all, thanks to the organizers for the invitation to speak here, and also thanks to all participants for your interest in open source, software technologies, and standardization. To tell you the truth, it's a long time that I've been dealing with ICT standardization. Actually, I joined the European Commission in 2006, and at that time, it was my first policy subject. I was dealing with ICT standardization, and you will understand that for an ex-Global 500 executive used to quick things, to quick business, and to implementing very quick actions, entering into a world where from the conception of a standard to an actual product takes at least 1 or 2 decades, it's quite a change. And to tell you the truth, at first I found ICT standardization a little boring. This has changed quite a lot in the last 16 years. And one of the problems was precisely that, the speed at which ICT standardization was moving. That okay, when we speak of standardization in other sectors, then maybe it's not such a problem that that it takes so long. But when you speak of a sector that moves at the speed of light, then indeed it's a problem. And our first duty there was to update the standardization system in Europe so that we could move at the same speed. And there were very different solutions to that. But what we found out is that we did not need to destroy the complete the standardization system just for the ICT. And that was the outcome and the birth of the multi-stakeholder platform that gave birth to the possibility to recognize in the system ICT specifications that were relevant. To tell you the truth, at a certain time, I found that the work was done. And so I moved to DG competition as a sort of saying, let's escape standards. Let's go to something more quick. And to my surprise, when I move in competition, my first cases have to do with standards, because ICT standards are key for competition. With an ICT standard, you can create a market. But what's more, with an ICT standard, you can avoid the transmission of the dominant position in one market to another that is connected to it. If you have interoperability standards that are clear, those that are acting in an interoperable market to the first one, which is holding a dominant position, can continue providing their product and do not have any issue. When you do not have those standards, then the communication between one layer and another becomes a little awful, and what happens is that the dominant position can be transmitted to another place. And this is certainly not what we want. But anyway, it's not only in DG competition that I could feel standards chasing me, but when I moved then to DG Connect, well, at the time DG IMSO, and in the research framework program, we saw standards as the key to transmit the research results quickly into market products. Now I'm working in the cloud and software unit. And to tell you the truth, standards are no longer boring. Actually, I am promoting actively standards because they are a key tool, a key policy tool to get achievements that otherwise would be impossible in a free society that is moving at the speed of light. But anyway, let me just go a couple of steps before and bring you to the question of why the European Commission is taking care about the standards. Note that the European Commission is a public administration, and as public administration, our leitmotif, our main objective, the raison d'etre is the European citizens. The European Commission as public administration has a duty to the EU citizens as a private company would have to its shareholders. And sorry, it moved too fast. And why and what can we do for the EU citizens? What is the duty that the European Commission is implementing to EU citizens? Well, what we are trying to get is more opportunities, more possibilities for the EU citizens so that they can have more things, and then they can live in a free, open world where they have all the resources available for, well, as the American Declaration of Independence said, the pursuit of happiness. And indeed, when we speak about new opportunities, that means that we have to test and see how we measure. And we measure them by economic growth. The more the economy is growing, the more opportunities that citizens have, the more jobs that there are available. So citizens can contribute also and can develop in and have more choices to take into account. And well, particularly I work in DG Connect, which is especially dealing with the ICT sector. And why? Because the ICT sector is important for the EU economy, as in the portfolio of activities of the European Commission, it is a key competitive factor that can bring more possibilities to the citizens. And well, in the beginning of this century, we were speaking about the information society. That's the reason why the DigiConnect was before known as INFSO. But what is true is that nowadays the ICT use is completely spread. 94% of the companies are using broadband. 78% have got a website in the EU in 2021. They are using social media. They are using ERPs, cloud computing, and now we're speaking about the Internet of Things, that we say that everything is going to be connected to the Internet, bringing more possibilities. And specifically in this context, I'm working in the unit on cloud computing and software. And I'm working in cloud computing and software because they both are linked. In the end, cloud computing you create through software. One thing is the infrastructure, but at a certain point in the level of the stack, you start just making sure that the software is actually creating the kind of a structure that you want, and that we call a cluster computing or cloud computing infrastructures. What are exactly the state of the market for cloud computing? Because one thing is that the users can have it, but the other is how it is provided. And well, since 2017, we can see that cloud computing has grown quite a lot, has even multiplied by 3. It was over 23 billion in 2020. However, we also see something that is quite strange. In such an environment, the European cloud service providers market share has decreased. And well, of course, in absolute terms, it has increased because the market has multiplied by 3. But in comparison vis-a-vis the rest of the world and the competitors outside the EU, well, it seems that it's not being done so well by the providers in Europe as it was from others. We can see how there are big hyperscalers, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, who have got quite a big market share. And in comparison, the biggest cloud provider in Europe has less than 2% of the market. And also from a demand side, we see that there is big disparity between companies. It's not the same how cloud computing is approached by big companies that by small companies. And there are large disparities also in the EU market depending on member states. And that makes difficult purchases. And of course, that actually takes, well, to have some specific policy lines so that to facilitate, to standardize, to normalize how things are done, so that we can create markets and we can then actually have got more competitiveness at the global scale. And it is because of this that we are acting heavily on a policy framework for data. We have issued the Data Act in 2022 to avoid vendor lock-in and making the EU citizens having more possibilities. We also acted to avoid abuse of market power with the Digital Market Act in the same year. We also see that there is an insufficient capacity at EU level. Sorry. And that's the reason why we created the Alliance for Industrial Data, Edge and Cloud. And we also see that there are governance issues affecting the whole system. And how can we solve them? Either with experts group working in the domain of cloud contracts, also with the cloud rulebook, and what is more important, with standards. ICT standardization is an important policy tool to be able to cope with the defiance the cloud era is bringing. And well, cloud era and software era, software technologies and standards are the way to ensure that we can keep on having a dynamic economy and also competition in a domain which is heavily affected by network issues. Anyway, the path to the future includes not only ICT standards, but also includes another thing, which is open source. When I started in 2006, sorry, I have to, sorry, but something got into my throat. When I started in 2006, there were big fights on open source, yes or no, in the software industry, and also on the closed software. The closed vendors were saying that basically open source was going to completely destroy their business and that it was a very bad thing for humankind. We are in 2022 and things have changed. Everybody is taking in the open source angle in the ICT. In the last 20 years, we have seen how open source has been pervasive in the whole ICT industry. And we also see that not only open source software, but now we are also speaking about open source hardware. I wanted to share this slide of the European Laboratory for Open Computing Architecture because of what it means in terms of openness and open standards and open source. We were speaking several years ago about, well, a complete open stack from the kernel up to the application. Well, why not going down? Why not bringing more open source down? Or why not standardize at certain points what we're doing below the kernel? Actually, the European Commission is heavily investing in getting things more open so that more can compete and that there is bigger choice for the customers. And that's why under the Horizon Work Program 2021, we actively promoted open source for cloud-based services, basically building below the kernel, extending the open source so that we could have open code and open standards at levels beyond. And why am I saying below the kernel? The role of standards in cloud infrastructure is at all layers of the ICT. But here I'm concentrating just in the infrastructure, not the middleware of the application, which comes obvious. You cannot have services in the cloud if forgetting about the protocols from the Internet Engineering Task Force, HTTP, SMTP, IMAP. They are all key in order to get cloud services, at least to get to the web services and start them. And of course, many others that allow you to interconnect. But when we are opening, and I mentioned opening the layers below the kernel, what is also obvious is that there are quite a long number of standards that are already there and that not necessarily we need to replicate them all so that we have open computing architectures below the kernel. In particular, the lines under Horizon Europe intend to use the results of the European Processor Initiative. And well, the EPI is actually providing low power processor for Europe. But what is also true is that in order to build cloud infrastructures, you need many other components apart from the processor. And you're not able to connect to these components unless you do not rely on standards. And here I understand that I am abusing a little of the term standard, which we usually use for those that are issued by the SNCNLEC entity and their counterparts, but actually here I'm also speaking about ICT specifications that are widely adopted by the industry, such as the DDR4 or 5 for the memories, or the SATA for interfacing with hard drives, or USB, PCI Express, or form factors as the ATX. These standards are crucial in order to build an infrastructure at the lowest, at the cheapest way. Let's say we want to build European cloud infrastructures, but let's go in tourist, not in business, which is much expensive and it does not make much sense. So here again, the ICT standards allow us to do a travel with the most efficient use of the public funding. But what's more, what we see nowadays is to a certain extent some sort of, I wouldn't say competition, but of coverage from the standards developing organizations and the open source communities. We're seeing that they are covering the whole ICT spectrum, but in a way something very, very differently. While we see the SNCNLEC, ETSI, the Internet Engineering Task Force, ITU, are developing very relevant standards for today's networks, we also see how open source communities, such as, for example, the Linux Foundation, Foundation or Eclipse are putting a source code which is widely used in many products of many companies that basically say, well, we can rely on this open source code as if it were a standard. And to a certain extent, standardization and open source become in the ICT world two sides of the same coin. But anyway, I think I have gone over the time, John, if I'm not mistaken. And what is also true is that from a Commission perspective, we like a lot to speak about what we've understood from the market and what is needed, but also we like a lot to hear from the stakeholders the best things that have to be developed in order to have a competitive EU market. And because of that, I will just say thanks to all of you. And in any case, if there's any question, I am here to answer. Thank you very much. John.
Thank you so much, Luis. That was a perfect introduction to everything that is going to follow in the rest of this webinar, and to some areas of standardization that many people are simply not familiar enough with. And now, as Luis indicated, we're now going to start hearing from our research projects, all of whom are deeply involved with standards in various ways. So we'll start with Ferran Diego of Telefónica and the Charity Project. So the floor is yours, Ferran. You're still muted.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, 1 second. I am sharing the screen. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank you, all of you, for the invitation. And basically, I would like to make you, put you into context, what is charity, in order to understand what is the purpose of our research. Basically, augmented reality, augmented and virtual reality is not new. It's concept. Basically, everybody knows what is augmented reality since Pokemon Go exists, when all the kids or all the people were traveling around in order to look for Pokemons. But it's still fascinating. Why it's fascinating? Basically, all this virtual reality, augmented reality, allows you to create illusion of the person of people. It means you can have a person in front of you that is not real by completely on holographic domain or with glasses. And also we can have objects and also landscapes like you were in a place without being there. And also allows you to have a wide variety of exciting applications that we will see what we are doing in charity. But in order to create such applications, you need to handle a lot of challenges, because you need to hide interaction between the virtual reality or augmented reality and yourself. And it means that you need hide requirements on connectivity, because you need to process a large data volume and a high speed in order to reduce the low latencies between who creates the content and also who receives and how you interact with the content that you are receiving. That's why the uptake up today is the progress that we have, the networks that we have with fiber optic, that it's every time it's increasing the speed independent of which countries. But basically we are moving to fiber optics in order to have these high speed networks. And also we need not only high speed, also we need processing mechanisms like the GPUs in order to create the rendering of these virtual worlds. And also you need the user requirements. As we say now, we have every time we will have new smartphones. Also, you can have displays for holographic displays, and also you need to have like Oculus, or in order to stay in the virtual reality, and also real motion tracking in order to know where you are, in order to interact with the present. But it means that all the recent advances that we have currently indicates that we can starting to have a significant progress in such domain. And basically, charity is the tries to develop a complete framework in order to enable such immersive communications. Because basically, we would like to have virtual reality on all holography in order to support the day-to-day business operations. social events like concerts or general lifestyle. But as I mentioned, all charity leverage an innovative cloud architecture in order to exploit what is edge solutions, a computing and network continuum, autonomous orchestration, application-driven interfacing, smart and adaptive resource management, in order to have such low latency, high speed, and ultra fast time processing of the resources that you will proceed. And basically, we will tackle multiple, up to 7 use cases. It's 3, but we divide it in 3 main categories. But at the end, we are making 7 use cases because we want to have an holographic concert where you record the people on the concert, not all in the same place, but they can be in different places and they represent us a real concert. Or you can have an holographic meeting or an holographic assistant that you say, right now with the current techniques like ChatGPT, you are able to talk with an holography of somebody and he can talk to you. Or you can have a virtual tour creator or medical training. Or you can even play, as I mentioned, you can have Pokemon Go or even better games using augmented reality. Or you can train in flight simulators, but in a very efficient way where you don't need to buy specialized hardware in order to feel that you are flying or you are able to build. And that is the objectives. It's like we need a lot of computational power, a lot of investment in trying to improve how is the computation, how we manage the resource computation, what is the best links in order to have a low latency, how to transmit the packages in order to don't have loss, to avoid package loss. We need a lot of advancements in all this infrastructure in order to achieve the possibility to create such applications. That's why in order to create, and we need to monitor a lot of standards organizations. We need to monitor and also try to see if we can contribute, because basically we can have 3GPP in order to know what are the codecs that can be used in 5G in order for XR experiments. But also we need to check the MPEG, the standardization organization, in order to know what are the best codecs for 3D point cloud or how to transmit for XR domain, because we need a lot of information on what the best practices what has been done and what we can improve. And that's why, and also not only from the codec from creating the processing time of the 3D point clouds. Also, we need to know the best strategies for the internet. And also we can take into account also what is the best orchestration, or what is the best artificial intelligence in order to include in such cloud computing or edge computing, if we can get benefit of the edge computing. We need to have monitor a large domain of organizations and try to fit what is the best solution. And that's why also we need to identify what are the contributions that we can have in such a standards, because you cannot create for all the standards that you are monitoring or checking a full complete specification, because you are not able to do such. But it depends of your technical of the contributions that you are making on the project. But at the end, what you need to identify which of the 4 contributions you can be in a standard, like a complete specification that you start from scratch, a new specification in order to, and is responsible to be editing in order to create a complete line of research in such a standard. Or maybe in a small degree, instead of going through a complete standard technical report, it's better to go to look for an active specification and see if you are improving such a specification by introducing some component that you are developing in your project. And then you need to contact with this person, add a section and improvement, and keep changing depending of what is happening. Or another more I like it is the proof of concept, because basically maybe in our domain we are focusing on cross-domain computing. It means that we have different clouds, and the idea is to check the computation, how to make the cross-domain efficiently in order to have this low latency. And the idea is that to create a demo that use the last things that is on the standards and try and see if we can improve them and showcase in a conference, create a report and see how it works at the end. Or maybe it's to be a member. There is to be there, checking, reading the emails, what is the advances, that in order to allow you to have a complete picture of what is going in the standard and see if what of the new specifications can be in your project without the need of contributing, because at the end you don't need to contribute in all. You also need to know what is happening in order to introduce yourself and not inventing the wheel. That's the idea. And we have not only standardization on the research projects. The idea is that also the open source communities and projects are our technological enablers and also key for the project development. For instance, in Telefónica, we made a study of this IPFS stuff, open source project, where we make a contribution there because we make a design and evaluation of the decentralized storage and delivery network in order to see if this new standard, new open source project is able to XR application, or at least for retrieving the data. But it seems that at the end, it was not fulfilling, but at the end, we provide some kind of input in such community saying that we make this evaluation, but it's not for XR, but helps. We will have other communities because you know what is the delay, the latency, and maybe it can be for other kind of media retrieval. And also we are using a lot of open source because at the end we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And that's why we are using Kubernetes and trying to see if we can contribute on Kubernetes or Cluster API. This is the current implementation of the open source that don't go to a complete naive solution and starting from the beginning. And basically that is what we are doing in Charity in terms of standardization and also in terms of open source. And thank you very much for your attention.
And thanks very much to you, Ferran. That was really quite fascinating, especially the huge amount of standards you're working with. We'll get back to that later during the panel, I'm sure. So now I'd like to pass the floor to Jesus Luna Garcia of Bosch and the MEDINA project. And I know he has a lot to say.
Yep. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to say thanks also to Juncal and John for the invitation to this session. So for us, it's also a very special and very dear topic of standardization. So please just give me 1 second to share my screen. Okay, so I hope that you are seeing my screen now.
Yes.
Perfect. So why do I say that it's very dear for us and very close to the topic of standardization in MEDINA? Well, basically because we like to think that MEDINA, and we always joke with our colleagues from the European Cybersecurity Agency, the ENISA, that MEDINA was at the right time and at the right place. So we are running basically and literally speaking, as we will see on my slides, hand by hand with the development of a standard that is going to be very relevant for cloud security in Europe. So that gives us a lot of opportunities to interact with the standardization world, and of course also a lot of challenges, because it's like if you are building a plane while the plane is already flying. You get my point. So just very quick background. From a cybersecurity perspective, some of you may have heard that a lot of regulations are coming. So very recently started with the NIS2. And also there are new cybersecurity regulations, Cyber Resilience Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, etc. And most of these regulations, they have a common denominator, which relates to the topic of certification schemes. So the idea of the European Commission, among others, is to make sure that there will be a security baseline for different services and products that will be offered or that they have some kind of internet connection. At the core of this so-called new European cybersecurity certification schemes, we have the European Cybersecurity Act that has defined that certification will have this central place in the new regulations. Certification that is going to be associated to these new fields has to be standard-based and also has to enable the topic of continuous compliance. I would like to highlight these two terms, standards and continuous compliance, because these are actually the basis for MEDINA, but I will come back to that in a couple of minutes. So based on these new European cybersecurity certification schemes, the Commission has delegated on ENISA, the European Cybersecurity Agency, the responsibility to start the development in a way that the ENISA selected a so-called ad hoc working group with representatives from the industry, from academia, from other standardization bodies, where myself, I am also part of one of these groups, to start developing schemes for 3 different kinds of technologies. One is the so-called certification scheme for common criteria. We also have, there is a work in progress, a certification scheme that is being worked for 5G. And the one where we are interested for the session today, which is the certification scheme for cloud services. Why this is important and what is the place that MEDINA is having into this new scheme for cloud security? Let me try to put it in with the following figure. So very important, one of the central ideas, apart from being based on standards, is that this upcoming certification that we are going to have for cloud services in Europe, and which is related to different regulations that are coming into place, is that there is a novel notion that is being added, which is called continuous certification, continuous assessments. So this brings, and this is really new in the topic of cybersecurity certification, this is bringing the notion that we have to promote automation. Automation for processes, one of the, I think I have been working in cybersecurity since '95, and one of the oldest processes that we have is cybersecurity certification. Cybersecurity certification is, traditionally speaking, a manual process, consumes a lot of resources, a lot of time, a lot of money. So novel in this new proposal from the Commission is, let's try to go in the direction of automation. How can we use realistic levels of automation to make more efficient certification processes? And this is exactly where MEDINA is getting into place, where we say, okay, if what we want to achieve today with this new certification scheme is to start adding some notions of automation to this new baseline that is called EUCS, this European Scheme for Cloud Security, how can this look like in the future, probably in 3 years or in 5 years, where we can rely much more on automation in order to have not only a small part of the certification scheme of the certification process automated, but let's try to go more, to be more ambitious, and let's try to see if we can get almost full automation of the cybersecurity certification process. So this is a big ambition from MEDINA to try to pave the road in order to make sure that we can bridge the gap from what today we are proposing with ENISA about continuous automated monitoring. And in the future, we can really have this so-called continuous automated audit-based certification. MEDINA is a project that was proposed in order to potentiate the adoption and the development of this new certification scheme. And therefore, also MEDINA is supporting the development of this new standard that is behind the certification scheme. Therefore, this very close relationship that we have with the world of standardization. MEDINA is a European project, a Horizon 2020 European project. We started at the end of 2020, and we are going to finalize in October this year. MEDINA is a really multidisciplinary pan-European project where we have the expertise not only from auditors that they are giving real-world feedback related to what we are proposing. We have also stakeholders like cloud providers, Fabasoft, one cloud provider in Austria, Bosch as a cloud provider that is relying also on the big cloud providers worldwide. We have technology centers that are behind Tecnalia, Fraunhofer, development, we have integrators, and the idea is actually to develop what is needed in order to give this step forward, in order to advance the state of the art, and in the future we can be able to have this notion of continuous automated certification for cybersecurity. So I mentioned that MEDINA has a lot to do with the standardization. So we have one specific task that is devoted to the topic, take into account, and also as mentioned before by Luis, so we focus on standardization bodies, but we are also doing some exploration, some scouting of the landscape to identify not only in Europe, but also worldwide, which other best practices, which other industrial best practices they could be adopted by our project. And also we are working in the direction of saying, okay, it's not only transferring what is being developed on the standards to the work that we are doing in our internal activities to make sure that there will be a sustainability of the project, that we are aligned to standards and that we can create interoperability. But also we are working in the other direction. We are also working in the direction that also was introduced by Ferran, where we want to make sure that we are also influencing some activities in the standardization world, that the outcomes that are created by our research work packages, they can also be moved into standardization, also to make sure that the sustainability of the project is guaranteed. So we have developed a full-fledged standardization strategy right at the beginning of the project. And this standardization strategy gave birth also a few months ago to the so-called standardization roadmap in MEDINA, where we have identified which are the main axes where we want to influentiate or we want to observe standards that we can use in our own project. And we have identified 3 topics which we consider are a primary enabler for all the nice outcomes that we are creating in our MEDINA project. So first of all, is related to the EUCS itself. So EUCS now has moved from the stage of being developed by by ENISA. Now this has been moved to CENELEC, where we are also participating on CENELEC to continue with the development of a so-called technical specification, which is going to be one of the pieces for this upcoming cybersecurity certification for cloud services. Also very important for us is the topic of what we call metrics. So we are working very hard within ISO and also together with NIST in America in order to make sure that we are able to develop the associated objective criteria so that these criteria can be used to the audit processes that are get into certification. So this criteria, we wanted to have it very objective in the form of so-called metrics so that they can be automatized, because this is actually at the real core spirit of our project. And of course, if we talk a lot about automation, that means that also we are observing and we are collaborating with the standards that they have to do with automation. Standards where automation and interoperability for automation we believe is going to benefit also the adoption of the EUCS in Europe. And in this particular case, we are working very close together with the NIST in America in order to push together a schema that can be leveraged for the cybersecurity automation, which is called OSCAL. We have been also collaborating very close with ETSI here in Europe in order to make sure that also the European adoption of OSCAL starts moving forward. And hopefully in the future, this is going to release the full potential of automation for cybersecurity. Just a very quick summary, some of the major achievements and next steps related to the topic of standardization that we are making in MEDINA. As I have mentioned in my previous slides, we provide a major support to ENISA to develop proof of concepts, to support them with experience that we have in the project so that it can be integrated into this new EUCS, into the guidelines, etc. We are also working very close to NIST in America, as mentioned it before, and also currently to ETSI, in order to make sure that we have proof of concepts where we can also create white papers, experience and position papers to how to use this OSCAL framework for the automation of cybersecurity. We are providing also feedback right now to the family of standards related to cybersecurity, very well known, I think, by some of us, the ISO 27000 family. So we have the chance also to start contributing to ISO 27017 on cloud security. And right now we are preparing also our contributions to the topics of metrics, security metrics in the context of ISO. And of course, our idea is to have this holistic perspective also from standardization in MEDINA to make sure that we tackle the three major topics that we have identified: adoption of EUCS, metrics, and automation. Last but not least, if anyone is interested in taking a look at our publicly available deliverables, taking a look at the white papers that we have on the topic of automation, we have also some blog posts that we have published related to how we are leveraging standards. So just feel free to visit our webpage, or just feel free to add your comments and questions later during the panel. So that's it from my side, John.
And thank you very much, Jesus. We do have a question that arrived from Tony Rutkowski, but I would like to take the question during the panel because I think it'll open up an interesting discussion. So let's move on now. And I'd like to welcome Maria Giuffrida of Trust IT, as I am from, and she is with the EUCloudEdgeIoT project. Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. I think you can see my slides now. Yes. Thank you all to all the participants and the speakers before me. As anticipated, my name is Maria Giuffrida from Trust IT, and today I'm representing the European Cloud Edge and IoT Continuum, which is not actually a project, but rather a collection of projects. So it's an umbrella initiative set up by the European Commission some months ago, where Luis is also involved. And so it's my pleasure to present what we're doing together with other projects involved and what are, let's say, the relations and the roles with both standards and open source within this initiative. So as the name suggests that we have selected for this initiative, we are trying to bring together, so to create a bridge between the cloud, IoT, and edge computing in between communities. We're doing so through the collective effort of a series of projects. We have namely two CSAs. One is Open Continuum and the other one is Unlock CI, which are respectively positioned in the supply and the demand side of the continuum. And we're trying to, let's say, support and coordinate the work of a series of research and innovation actions in this field. You see a cluster, the main cluster we're dealing with at the moment, that's the meta operating systems cluster of projects, the one that are in purple in this slide. And our support is to try and help their work in actually creating this continuum, this new infrastructure, promoting cooperation, promoting synergies and common methodologies among them. And as you can think, and you can easily understand, a lot of this coordination and cooperation and finding a consensus and common methodologies and mechanisms passes through the concept of standards, because as we have already heard in previous presentations, these standards are needed to allow data exchange, to allow interoperability, as we were mentioning before, across all the systems, but they're also needed to allow the spread of probably new technological trends and new innovations that are being brought thanks to the merging of these three up to the past formally separated but quickly converging domains. So we're studying basically the use cases. We're trying to collect the use cases that these research projects are doing, but we're also looking at what companies are doing to try and create synergies, and cross-fertilization among all these initiatives. More precisely, the initiative, which started in June 2022, and all the projects in the initiative started between June and September, is structured across 4 or 5 phases that you see in this slide. The first one is the development that lasted the first 6 months, where we try to understand the landscape and also produce some reports of what's the status in this field. Then we are now in the engagement phase, so where we're trying to create synergies, create connections, and so our presence also in this sister project as SWForum is an example. We're trying also to create engagement in the broader ecosystem with industrial partners and with SDOs and other bodies that are active, in the standardization areas. Then the second part of the initiative will see 2 other phases. So the validation via synergies, via consultation and consultation events, and via task forces that are being set up across the whole projects. And then there will be the embed phase that will be actually at the end of the project, where we will produce some frameworks and some readiness tools to understand how many of the use cases currently being developed are actually ready to go into the market, and what is their standardization or pre-standardization needs. And in all these 4 phases, as you can see in this slide, there are plenty of opportunities for both open source and standardization activities. So one of the goals of this initiative is to actually contribute to the common understanding of a taxonomy for the cloud edge and IoT continuum, and understanding how to create an open architecture across all these technologies. Another objective is to guide the research projects in the initiative to understand how they can contribute to the open source domain and to the standardization field. We're also planning to have some trainings for industrial players, as well as to understand the role of standards for the use cases that come not only from the project, but also from European industrial adopters. We have just started to hold some workshops that are focused on industry, where competitiveness levels and other types of drivers for the actual adoption and usage of CI, Cloud Edge IoT, have been analyzed together with the standards that the projects and the companies are working on. And of course, our role is also to understand how all the actors in the ecosystem and in the value chain can interact with each other and contribute together to the study and the refinement of existing or new standards. So this is more or less the plan of activities that the initiative is working on, but I want also to highlight the fact that we're not doing this from scratch, but we are continuing somehow the work, and we are working in synergy with existing initiatives in this field. And as an example, I'm showing you the NG-IoT initiative, which has already produced roadmaps for IoT standardization and open source in Europe, and Horizon Cloud, which is the other umbrella initiative in CSA regarding instead the cloud standards and open source initiatives. So we are bringing together these existing communities in a new environment, while leveraging also other synergies with other projects. So I have put here an example of other 4 relevant initiatives we are contributing to and we are interacting with at the moment. One is very straightforward, so the SWForum, that also tackles open source and software and cybersecurity topics, which are relevant also for the Cloud Edge and IoT Continuum. There are synergies as well with the Stand ICT initiative, where many of the players involved in our initiative are actually fellows, so that have received funding from the project to work on their ICT standards in Cloud Edge and IoT technologies. There's also HSbooster, which I'm not going to talk long about because Ray is speaking after me about it to support standardization of projects. And we also have synergies about other projects such as EUIoT, which has managed to bring together all the fragmentation and consolidation needs that were present in IoT verticals. So they already did this in IoT, and we're trying to do this similar work, but along the whole continuum, including also cloud and edge. So I think that's all for my presentation and overview of this initiative, and feel free to reach out to me if you want to be involved or learn more about what we're doing. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much for this wealth of information about projects, current, past, and future. And in fact, you gave a lead into our next speaker, who is Ray Walsh from Dublin City University, talking about HSbooster, the Horizon Standards Booster, which is a very important resource that everybody needs to know about who wants to have anything to do with standards. Ray?
Thanks very much, John, and thanks, Maria, for the lead in, and also to mention other potential other projects that we're collaborating with, and other organizations like in IoT, like through HSbooster and through Stand ICT would include AIoTI and Living in EU, and so the ecosystem is fertilized across lots of areas. So anyway, just to jump into the talk. My name is Ray Walsh from Dublin City University, and I'm just going to give an overview of the HSbooster project, which is a Horizon Standards Booster, and its raison d'etre is really to support projects like MEDINA, who are part of the our family of supportive projects, to valorize their outputs and to generate impact in the sort of research outputs from the projects through standardization. So it's got a number of key elements to it in terms of what the HSbooster is about. It has to build a European community of experts. So I mean, we grow the ecosystem of standardization experts that are available. We contribute to the valorization of the outputs of the projects by linking up the projects with expertise so that they can get advice on what's the best way forward in terms of boosting the outputs of the research project. And this applies to the Horizon end of the Horizon Standards Booster applies directly to both the H2020, Horizon 2020 projects, but also the Horizon Europe projects that have been funded to date. And the partners that are involved in providing this expertise through the expert matching process and also through the training process are Complan Trust IT Services, DCU ourselves, University of Belgrade, Danske Standards, Danish Standards, and SGS on the certification side as well. So to give an overview then of what's involved is we have these call topics, and the call topics are over a broad spectrum of research areas, including health resilience, sustainable digitalization, EU green transition, smart city, and circular economy. So unlike Stand ICT, the HSbooster support services for projects, Horizon funded projects, across a much wider spectrum of domains and sectors. So for example, you can under health, you can have ANA healthcare or design use of medical devices. Under resilience, it could be hybrid civil defense, data protection, high cybersecurity, digitalization, we look at cybersecurity, data, quantum technology, and for green transition, you talk about clean energy, environmental impact, etc. Smart cities and circular economy would have encompass both circular economy but also green buildings and the infrastructure associated with smart city and circular economy. So we have these open call topics for projects who are doing research in these areas and funded in these areas can apply to HSbooster for a free service that will be provided. And what does that free service look like and how is it delivered? Well, the projects come in here, like you just look at the graphic on the left-hand side. So as I said, this applies only to Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe funded projects. We build, in terms of HSbooster, this community of experts, standardization experts, which will provide services to the projects and in a one-to-one manner. We also have a training academy, which is led by Ivana Mijatovic from University of Belgrade. And the training academy will provide a range of training services, both to the EU projects, but also to the standardization experts in terms of building up their portfolio of expertise to provide standardization support. At the very lowest level, like we will have a help desk, sort of a Q&A type thing, sessions, or Q&A, no, sort of more, it's actually not Q&A, more of a FAQ, frequently asked questions type support, where a chatbot can actually provide information to the project or to general users on introduction to standardization and some of the terminology and basic stuff. Then there's the second level of support is mapping experts to projects. So we analyze the project's requirements. We look at the expertise of the experts that are actually available across the various domains, and we try and get a good mapping to support the projects. And finally, then we have these consultancy services where the actual experts that are recruited, that are used to provide a one-to-one consultancy services with the projects to advise them on what's the best way forward to maximize their outputs from their projects. And that can be through a number of ways. It could be engaging directly with a technical committee or a working group or an ad hoc group. It could be following a particular standard or getting access to a particular standard, joining a mirror committee. There's lots of different things that may be advised by the expert at the end of the day. So that expert then will provide, as I said, advice in a written report back to the project. The timeline for doing this then is that we start off with in the first meeting approach, basically to get the expert to talk about their overview of where their expertise comes from and like what technical committees and our standards development organizations they've been involved in. And on the project side, we want to get an idea of what their objectives are and what would they like to achieve. Like, is it just a broader appreciation of what standardization is about, or is it something? Have they identified a specific working group or a specific standard that they think that they would like to contribute to? And then over the process of the next number of meetings, then the advice is built up in terms of the consultancy services is developed by the standardization expert specific to the requirements of the project, and the project then will act on advice and reassess the objectives and activities. And the final meeting then will be a wrap-up activity where the written report is provided by the experts to the project, and then the project may use that as part of its own deliverables in terms of their funded requirements, or it might be just as a visibility in terms of saying that we have engaged in standardization and it improves their impact of their results by saying that they have some ownership of standardization and that they have awareness of the standardization landscape and are trying to engage with it. So the service delivery machinery behind that in terms of project applications is that we have to check that the projects are eligible. In other words, they are funded through Horizon 2020, Horizon Europe. Try and identify suitable experts, approve the experts and make contact, create contracts because it's a paid service, answer initial queries, and also then do the service delivery training call. The external pool of experts obviously have to be attracted in as well through the open call for experts. They provide applications through the platform. We do an eligibility check again on the expert as well, and we provide a ranking then based on their overall experience, number of years of experience, number of technical committees they've been involved in, and what their role is in terms of their standardization role and what type of service they can deliver. Then we end up with the service delivery. You have the start of the delivery, introductions up to 4 conference calls. Training resources are available then through the platform if required. And then we have continuous service delivery monitoring with feedback collection and impact monitoring for the duration of the project. Currently, we have 59 projects which have already been matched up with the experts, and the experts have been contacted. 32 of those expert contracts have been signed, and 11 more are actually out for signature. And between training calls and scheduling of experts, we have 27 and 12. We have 39 services in some process at this stage, so that the services are actually up and running. If you want to have a look at the sort of split across the project applications, just briefly to give some sort of a flavor of where the volume of applications come in. You can see the health and personalized services high up there, data quality and artificial intelligence, also access and usage of data, very popular. But then you also see that data protection and cybersecurity and the likes of green and sustainable production or clean energy is quite popular as well. Looking at the project applications across geography, you can see that the various parts of Europe, like Southern Europe, is is mostly where the projects, and Central Europe, where most of the projects come from. The vast majority are Horizon 2020 because it's one of the older programs. So most of the projects that are funded under Horizon 2020 are more mature and are closer towards the valorization of outputs at this stage. And across the breakdown of the types of partners, you're looking at academic research 40%, SMEs 30%, so that's 70%, and large enterprise then 11%. So it's got a good split as well. The split on project contacts between male and female is 60% to 38%. If you look at from the expert perspective, we have a decent matching between the actual topics that the projects are looking for and the expertise that we have experts applying in. And I'm looking at on the experts geography distribution. So the experts themselves, 51% Central Europe, Southern Europe is 23%, and Northern Europe 11%. 75-25 split in terms of gender across the experts, which sort of tallies with the international norms for SDOs and gender split in standardization development. Across organizations, and again, similarly, you have academia, a big chunk, SMEs, 18%, and then between SDOs, national contact points and national bodies, and others, we have the other larger proportions. Consultancy services, 11% as well. And in terms of role, the type of delegate, or sorry, type of expert we get in, this can vary from delegate to head of delegation to editor of documents, convener of a convener of working groups, chairs of standards committees, and then experts as well, which would be nationally appointed experts to contribute to international standardization. And then finally, the types of supports that projects are actually looking for. Sometimes it's just to propose a new standardization item to a technical committee, influence process and outcomes of standardization. So to be in the room where these decisions are being made and to contribute to that process. Identify needs for new and revised standards. If they've identified potentially a gap in the technology or the technological area. And then in terms of some examples to date, then we have sort of one-to-one small group meetings. We have had engagement with entire consortiums where they've asked for a presentation on standardization to the whole consortium rather than just to the project lead. Looking for particular deliverables like standards landscapes or standard strategy plans as outputs. And in terms of practical expertise, they want to know how to give input in terms of standardization, how standards work, what does consensus mean, what's the timeline associated with developing a project, and these type of issues with international standardization. So there's a lot of information there, and I just want to give a brief overview then of that training that's made available. Part of the training academy of HSbooster is to provide these different levels of supports through training material at advanced, intermediate, and at beginner level, where we have the basics, we have sort of the practice of standardization, and then we have the experience, like in terms of gleaning and harvesting and correlating and annotating the results of interviews and case studies and workshops. So you can see here what the learning outcomes are for various levels of, in terms of influencing processes, participating in standardization, creating new work items, identifying needs and areas to get involved in, to types of standardization that may be applicable to different projects. Needs for standards application in terms of to identify the needs for within the project, implement adequate standards in product process and systems, understand the standards development organizations, their processes and their cooperations in terms of liaisons and links with other SDOs, and to be able to understand the economical, societal, and technical impacts of standardization standards. These can be societal impacts, it can be economic impacts, it could be environmental impacts. And to be able to understand the history of standardization, so where it's come from, like, I mean, the standards have been around for a long time, and to be able to understand the basic terms and basics of standardization in terms of what is a de jure standard, what's a de facto standard, et cetera, so getting into the terminology associated with standardization and the basics. So there's a lot of information here. These slides will be made available after the talk, and we can go through them in a bit more detail. Happy to take any questions in the session afterwards as well. Thank you very much.
And thanks very much to you, Ray. That is indeed a huge amount of information and useful for everybody. And by the way, including also the experts participating in it. Please keep it in mind that we're always looking for for experts too. So now I'd like to use the rest of the time to have a discussion about a couple of key items that have been brought up. So would our speakers please turn on their videos so that we can see you. And the first question I have is, I'd like to address to Jesus. You have received a question has arrived from your colleague in the audience, who is Tony Rutkowski. And by the way, Tony himself is also a veteran of standardization. He's with the Center of Internet Security and has been involved for decades with the standards organization. And he brought up, I wouldn't call it the elephant in the room, but certainly something that needs talking about. We talk a lot about open standards. But what does an open standard mean, especially if it's behind a paywall and costs thousands of euros? Is that really an open standard? Shouldn't we be using, we've talked a lot about interoperability, but shouldn't we be using a different approach to interoperability? For example, the OSCAL that you mentioned. By the way, OSCAL means, for those of you who don't know about it, Open Security Controls Assessment Language, right? So, Jesus, can you give us your thoughts about this and just the whole problem of open standards and freely available standards? It's a big topic. Help us.
It's actually a very good question and a very fair topic. I will give you my personal opinion. I think that open standards and freely available standards are really the enabler for innovation. So we see, and I will tell you from my battlefront, which is cybersecurity. We always, as cybersecurity experts, we complain that our users, they don't understand us. We complain that our users, they don't have security know-how in order to achieve something. So I have been, I think, on both sides, on the industrial side, on the academia side, and every time that we need to look for the state of the art, every time that we need to look for the standards, in most of the cases, for the relevant standards, we are just in front of a paywall. So I think that just like in the case of open software, open source software, and let me try to do an analogy, there is a need to find probably new business model for SDOs in order to make sure that the relevant standards that they are producing, and I think that all the standards are relevant, they are developed in an open way to make sure that the whole process is transparent, is agile, and second, that these are going to be freely available to make sure that they are going to reach to all the audiences, and then they are going to trigger, in consequence, also innovation and trainings and etc. that at the moment is difficult to achieve.
Yeah, you brought up this innovation thing, which is actually in the title of the webinar, but it hasn't really been talked about very much. I'd like to ask Ray, who has seen many projects and people pass over his desks in the projects. Can you explain how they think they're going to innovate with standards? I thought it was the other way around. I thought standards just slowed you down.
Well, it depends on how you approach standardization. I mean, there is, I suppose, there's an old view of standardization has been very slow and slow moving in terms of and not contributing to innovation. It comes sort of after the fact, but it depends on how you approach standardization. I know of several examples of companies within Ireland alone, you know, who take the approach of developing standards at the same time as they're developing their technology. So they co-evolve their technologies with the generation of new standards, and a number of companies that I could name easily, like with the likes of OpenNet and DecaWave and Teoglas, and their technology was developed in parallel with the development of a standardized approach, in other words, contributing to international standards. And what that gives them a market advantage. I mean, it's not completely altruistic in terms of their approach, because you get market advantage by building interoperability into your project, by building international standardization into your project and getting consensus at international level that this is the best practice approach to this particular technology area. then you're obviously pursuing a global agenda, a scaling agenda, like for your product, service, or tool, by having it globally ready, you know, as you're evolving the technology in parallel with the standard. So this is key to innovation, and it's part. There's a life cycle associated with this. We can get into it in general terms, that there's an innovation life cycle. Standardization is key to that, because part of the innovation life cycle is chaos at some stage, where you get emerging technologies and you get this proliferation of new actors in the area, and that chaos only gets quelled by standardization, where you get survival of the fittest, of people with the globally best practice approach to that technology. It gets adopted as an international standard, and that can be through different mechanisms, can be through open source, can be through de jure standards, can be through de facto standards. They all end up in the same way. It provides this stability in the market.
Thanks. You mentioned the word chaos, and in fact, that brings to mind that standards themselves can, well, I wouldn't say produce chaos, but because of the proliferation and the number of standards sometimes needed, chaos could be a risk. And in fact, that has happened in the EUCloudEdgeIoT area. And I wanted to ask Maria about that. You mentioned many standards, and I remember in a discussion in December, the biggest topic was how to avoid chaos in all of the many standards that had to be dealt with. Can you give some insights into what's happening?
Yeah, thanks, John, for this question. It is actually true that, you know, we have this major aim of bringing together these three communities and their work and what they're doing. And it's good because in this way we can try somehow and harmonize, but it's also complicated. So it's also a challenge because there are all these different terminologies and all the different taxonomies about which people need to agree on. The approach that we are using in this umbrella initiative to help this coordination and reduce the chaos, actually find an agreement, is via cooperation mechanisms that are task forces. So these task forces have already been launched in the past months. Officially, they're also been launched to a wide set of research projects in the community. And the idea is that we have for now 6 task forces. Each of the task force is focused on a topic. For instance, we have a task force on architecture, another one on open source engagement, another one on strategic liaisons, which is also trying to create a connection with SDOs. So it has a lot to do with the standards part, and on other different topics where, you know, by bringing a little bit of organization around the main topic, we try to select the most important priorities for that domain and organize a discussion and organize, you know, the collection of the results that are there from the projects, and also help projects cooperate together to create something in that task force. And the other mechanism, let's say, that we have found so far is to really try and identify some priority use cases and some priority, let's say, sectors that we see as most promising. And so that's why in the events and meetings that we have organized so far, we are trying to include a sector perspective. So we have like 5 sectors: manufacturing, we have health, energy, and a few others, where we deep dive and try to limit, let's say, the scope of the analysis to keep an order, let's say, and we're proceeding this way.
All right, thanks very much. In fact, we have a sector expert with us here, Ferran, who is in the media sector, and that is one of the worst in the sense of that you really have no choice but to manage many different standards. So how do you do that in your sector, in the sector that you're involved in? Let's say you showed us this gigantic slide, which showed many media standards, but also communication standards that were just necessary. How are you all dealing with this to keep everything straight?
No, thank you, John. It's like basically the idea is that we need to have a live document in order to monitor what are the things what are our contributions and how much with the current standards. And also there's a lot of effort trying to identify such standards, because when we start at the beginning of the project, we identify a few, but when you start to look for more standards because when you create the architecture of the complete platform that you are building and you see that you have a cross-domain integration fabric and also communication between clusters, cross-domain, and then you're starting to identify that there are standards that are interesting to monitor, because maybe we need to create some kind of slice management inside these clusters and connectivity. And then you look, identify them and see if we can benefit from what is in the standard and include into the project. And once we have this, we should do the inverse way. If what we improve in our project, we have to contribute, but that's why you need a complete list of contributions from your project, because at the end, what you have in the project is reflected on the standards. That's basically this. You get info from the standards like research papers, and then you provide to the community. It's a back and forth strategy, and that's why. But when you have so many standards, you need to go one by one, partner, trying to deal what are the contributions, look the synergies, and try to look for help, because one person cannot handle 17 standards. That's a very difficult task. That's why it's like always have it all in our own live document that people can edit with the marks and try to do all the best and try to prioritize based on what is the most successful contribution that you can provide to the standard. That's why you need to have internal workshops in order to identify that important contributions.
Now, that's a real statement from the trenches. That's for sure. Somebody's really involved. Okay, I'd like to get back to close out with to get back to something that was raised by Jesus a little bit earlier. I'd like you to go back to it. You said we need a new way of doing standards. That is, they need to change their business model. They need to change their approaches. Can you expand on that, Jesus? Tell us again about how you think the standards making process should evolve in the future to be more compatible with what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I will not give specific examples, but I think if we take a look at the landscape of SDOs, we will see already some of the SDOs that they have gone through this model. They have gone through the model of creating open standards to involve the community. They make an open call to start the development of standard or the revision of the standard. And then afterwards, they start with the collaborative work. They create the standard, and the standard is publicly available. Then this standard, we may need to look, of course, into the details. Probably we need different licensing models, like in the case of the open source community. But I think that is the way to go. There is still the open question, and I find it also a very fair open question that we used to have the same one with the open source community some years ago, which is about the funding. So we need to make sure that there are, and probably here I will reflect on the Commission, in order to make sure that there is new funding business model also for those European standardization organization, which depend on these paywall standards in order to fund themselves their activities. So I think this is a work that hopefully will start soon. Yes, I think that most of us will be happy to contribute.
Yeah, thanks. Ray, I remember that you were nodding several moments ago when this topic was first brought up, and I had the feeling you had a couple of ideas on this too. Can you say what you think about where standards should be going?
Yeah, I think that we can get to sort of a collaborative approach to standardization, but it requires dialogue at the highest level within the SDOs to get this off the ground. And there's some work going on in those areas already, but there is a collaboration obviously between the SDOs in terms of liaisons and joint agreements, etc. Vienna and Frankfurt, etc. At the European level and at the international level. But I think the pace at which standards are developed is a key issue for people, and that's that the open approach tends to be more agile, more flexible, and to deliver standards quickly, more quickly. The de jure standardization method used by international standards development organizations like the ISOs and IECs and ITU, etc., tends to take a much longer approach, longer timelines, because they'd be validated by national bodies, and that requires going out to votes and revising of the documents, and that can be a slow process. But I think that there are methods that are used that are used by the open community, open source community, open software community as well, which can be adopted by the existing SDOs, which will speed up the delivery of the standards, number one. Also, I think that standardization needs to be fair. It needs to be the outputs, in other words, the standards which contribute to markets and a global domestic product, economic activity in regions, etc. That needs to be fair across the board. And I think having to pay for standards in some instances and not have to pay in other instances is not actually fair. And it's not fair from an industrial point of view as well, because the larger players, like the larger enterprises, the payment for these standards is not a problem, but for startups and SMEs, that can be an issue. So I think there's a happy middle ground that can be reached where you get the best of both worlds. And Jesus mentioned it earlier, is that I think they need to look at a different business model in terms of how they actually generate revenue from standardization. And I think putting a paywall for the standards is not the way for the SDOs to do that. I think it should be, it can be done, like, in the similar ways that open source manages to pay for its work as well.
Oh, great. So I think we have an exciting future ahead for standardization, let's say, and I hope that all of us can make this go forward. I think we've reached the end of our time, and I think we should thank our participants for being there, and certainly our experts, both here and in the audience. I want to also thank Tony for his very stimulating questions that he has asked. We won't be able to get to all of them, but we will ensure that the questions are asked to the experts here on the panel, and that they get answered in the post-event report. So we will ensure that the questions asked will get answered, and that there will be a comprehensive report summarizing what happened in this very important webinar, I would say. So I would like to now pass the floor to Hunkal for some final words, and including some information about what's coming up. So
thank you very much, John, to you and all the speakers. So yeah, I wanted to congratulate all for this very interesting discussions. So from today's discussions, it is clear that the role of standards are key in the whole ICT spectrum. So from augmented, we heard about augmented reality, also from the network to the applications and the whole software, the computing capabilities, or even the processors. So it is true that the standards has a long history in the ICT, and unknown benefits such as avoidance of vendor lock-in, or enable interoperable markets. Also, let's say, transmitting the research results into the market, and at the end, promoting this free society and improving the European or the sovereignty, technology sovereignty. And even more nowadays with this large coverage from all the SDOs, but not also from them, but also from the incorporation of the open source communities and these initiatives that are producing open standards, open specifications, freely available standards, which indeed are the key enablers for this innovation, and that for sure will have an impact in the business models of these SDOs that need to be rethought. So today we have heard and learned about the different standardization strategies from the different European projects that were here today. Some more technological ones like charity in the media sector, more, let's say, standard focus like MEDINA, or even the Horizon Standard Booster, or the umbrella projects such as the EUCloudEdgeIoT. So I want to thank you very much to all the participants today, the speakers, Luis, John, Ferran, Jesus, Maria, Reid, and of course, all the attendees. And as anticipated by John, please stay tuned to the post-event report that we will create, and where also the discussions and the open questions, the questions that we have will be answered from the speakers. Our next webinar, which will be part of this webinar series, will be on DevOps practices, technologies, and frameworks. So we will move to the DevOps world. And we will have speakers again from the projects working on these topics from different perspectives. So please stay tuned to our webpage and our social media announcements. And again, thank you very much to all of you.
And thanks for myself too. Have a good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.